My son sent me a text message on Christmas Eve that read, "Dad, stay away, they are here. I am sorry, do not come. I did not listen. I drove through a blizzard to get to him, and what I found that night will haunt me until I die. I found my son chained to a water pipe in his own basement, his leg shattered and wrapped in a dirty cast, while his in-laws feasted like kings upstairs in the living room I had paid for. My name is Harlan Cross. I am 70 years old, and they thought I was just a helpless old man they could push around. They were wrong. What I did next to save my boy and destroy their lives became a legend in our town. Before I tell you how I unleashed hell on them, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe family is worth fighting for. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I was 40 miles out of town, driving my 2005 Ford F-150 through a sheet of white snow when the phone buzzed on the dashboard. The wipers were fighting a losing battle against the ice, but I looked down anyway. The message from Brent was short. "Dad, do not come. They are here. I am sorry. Please stay home." I stared at the glowing screen. This was not my son. Brent was the kind of man who would drive 2 hours just to fix a leaking faucet for a neighbor. He was an architect with a heart of gold, and he loved Christmas more than anyone I knew. For him to tell me to stay away on the one night of the year we always spent together meant something was wrong. Dead wrong. I did not turn the truck around. I shifted into four-wheel drive and slammed my boot onto the gas pedal. The old engine roared a sound that usually comforted me, but tonight, it sounded like a warning. You have to understand something about how they see me. To my daughter-in-law, Brittany, and her parents, Buck and Trish Gallagher, I am just an embarrassing footnote. I am the old man who lives in a log cabin in the woods, who wears a Carhartt jacket that is 20 years old, and who smells like sawdust and pine needles. Brittany calls me the hillbilly behind my back. She thinks I am a broke retired contractor who scrapes by on Social Security. She does not know the truth. None of them do. They do not know that I founded Cross Industries 30 years ago. They do not know that I built half the skyline in the state capitol. They do not know that when I sold the company 5 years ago, I walked away with $80 million deposited into a blind trust. I kept the old truck and the cabin because I like them, not because I have to. I wanted Brent to build his own life without the weight of my money, so I never told him the full extent of it either. I bought him his house through a shell company so he would have a roof over his head, but he thinks he is paying a mortgage to a bank. I pressed harder on the gas. The last time I saw Brent was 3 weeks ago. He looked thin. His eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. He told me he fell down the stairs and hurt his ankle. I believed him then. I should not have. I pulled into the driveway of the colonial villa I had secretly purchased. It was lit up like a beacon. There were 6 luxury cars parked in the circular drive, including a brand new Mercedes with a red bow on top. I parked my rusted truck right behind it, blocking it in. I could hear the bass of the music thumping through the brick walls. They were having a party. A big one. My son tells me to stay away because of some emergency, and they are throwing a gala. I marched up the front steps and pounded on the heavy oak door. I did not wait. I pounded again. The door swung open, and I was hit with a blast of warm air smelling of expensive perfume and roasted meat. Standing there blocking my way was Buck Gallagher. He was wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket that looked 2 sizes too small for his gut. In his hand, he held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. I recognized the bottle on the table behind him. It was my private reserve scotch, a bottle I had given Brent for his 30th birthday, telling him to save it for a special occasion. Buck was drinking it like it was apple juice. "Well, look who crawled out of the woods," Shuck sneered, his face flushed with alcohol. "We did not think you would make it down the mountain, old-timer. Brent said you were not coming." I looked past him. The house was full of strangers. People in sequins and suits holding plates of food. "Where is my son?" I asked, my voice low. Buck took a sip of the scotch and smirked. "Brent is indisposed. He has come down with a terrible flu. Very contagious. Brittany has him quarantined so he does not infect the guests. You know how delicate he is. Now why do you not turn that rust bucket around and go back to your shack before you embarrass us?" He tried to close the door, but I put my work boot in the jam. I spent 40 years carrying lumber and pouring concrete. I might be 70, but I am not weak. I shoved the door hard. Buck stumbled back, spilling the scotch on his velvet lapel. "Hey, watch it, you senile old fool," he shouted. I stepped into the foyer. The music seemed to stop. Conversations died down. People turned to look at the intruder in the flannel shirt and wet boots. That is when I saw her. Trish Gallagher, my son's mother-in-law. She was standing by the fireplace holding court with a group of women. She was wearing a silver dress that sparkled under the chandelier. But it was not the dress that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was around her neck. She was wearing a double strand of vintage pearls with a diamond clasp. My wife Molly had worn those pearls on our wedding day. I had kept them in a velvet box for 10 years after Molly died of cancer, waiting for the right moment. I gave them to Brittany on the day she married Brent. I told her, "These are for you to wear when you carry the next generation of our family." And now Trish Gallagher was wearing my dead wife's pearls while drinking champagne in my son's house. I felt a cold rage settle over me. It was not the hot anger of a fistfight. It was the cold, calculating anger of a demolition expert deciding exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole building down. I ignored Buck, who was sputtering behind me. I walked straight into the living room. "Brittany," I called out. My daughter-in-law emerged from the kitchen. She looked perfect. Too perfect. Her hair was done up, her makeup was flawless, and she was smiling that camera-ready smile she used for her social media followers. She froze when she saw me. "Harlan," she said, her voice pitching up an octave. "What a surprise. We thought you were snowed in." "Where is he, Brittany?" She rushed over, grabbing my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong. Her nails dug into my jacket. "Dad, please, not here. Brent is downstairs. He is sleeping. He really is sick. You do not want to disturb him." She was guiding me toward the front door, trying to herd me out like stray cattle. I pulled my arm away. "I am not leaving until I see him." "Fine," she hissed, her smile dropping for a fraction of a second. "He is in the guest room in the basement. He needed darkness and quiet. But you can only peek in. If you wake him up, he gets very agitated." She pointed toward the hallway door that led to the finished basement. I walked toward the door. Buck and Trish were watching me like hawks. I could feel their eyes drilling into my back. I opened the door to the basement stairs. It was dark down there. I turned on the light switch, but nothing happened. "Bulb is out," Buck called from the living room. "Just go down and look if you have to. But make it quick." I stepped onto the landing and closed the door behind me, muffling the sound of the party. The air changed immediately. Upstairs, it smelled like roast beef and pine. Down here, it smelled of bleach and something else. Something metallic, like old copper pennies or blood. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I walked down the carpeted steps. This was supposed to be the entertainment room. Brent had a big television down here, a pool table, a bar. The room was stripped. The furniture was pushed to the walls. The pool table was covered in boxes. "Brent," I whispered. There was no answer, just the hum of the furnace. I swept the light across the room. In the far corner near the utility closet, there was a shape. I moved closer. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was a wheelchair. An old, rusted manual wheelchair, not the high-tech one Brent would have needed if he just sprained an ankle. Sitting in the chair was a man. His head was slumped forward on his chest. He was wearing a stained t-shirt and boxer shorts. He was shivering violently. I ran to him. I dropped to my knees. "Brent." He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were swollen shut on one side. His lip was split. He looked like he had gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. "Dad," he croaked. His voice was dry, brittle. I shined the light down. His right leg was encased in a plaster cast, but it was not a medical cast. It was sloppy, lumpy. It looked like someone had done it themselves with supplies anciens from a hardware store. The toes sticking out were purple and swollen. But that was not the thing that made me vomit in my mouth. Around his left ankle, his good leg there, was a heavy iron chain, the kind you use to tow a vehicle. It was wrapped tight, padlocked, and the other end was looped around the main cast iron water pipe running along the wall. My son. The architect. The man who designed libraries and schools. He was chained to a pipe in his own basement like an animal. There was a piece of silver duct tape hanging off one side of his cheek. He had managed to rub it off, but the red irritation on his skin showed it had been covering his mouth for a long time. "Oh my God, son," I whispered, reaching for the chain. "Who did this?" Brent flinched when I touched him. He looked up at the ceiling where the thumping of footsteps from the party echoed down. "You have to go," he whispered. Tears leaked from his good eye, cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "They are insane, Dad. They made me sign papers. They took my phone." I grabbed the padlock. It was a heavy-duty master lock. I could not break it with my hands. "I am getting you out of here," I said, standing up. "I am going to kill them. I am going to go upstairs, and I am going to kill them all." "No," Brent hissed, grabbing my hand with icy fingers. "Stop. Listen to me. You can't just fight them. They have leverage." "What leverage could they possibly have?" I demanded. "They have videos, Dad. They staged an intervention 3 days ago. They forced pills down my throat and filmed me looking high and aggressive. They have emails they forged on my computer sent to my boss resigning from the firm. They told everyone I had a mental breakdown and relapsed on painkillers. If you call the police now, they will show the videos. They will say I am dangerous and you are an enabler. They will have me committed to a state facility and they have power of attorney. I signed it, Dad. They broke my leg and said they would break the other one if I didn't sign." I looked at his leg. "You fell down the stairs, you said." Buck, Brent whispered. "Buck did this. With a 9-iron. He swung it like a baseball bat." The rage inside me turned into something white-hot and blinding. I wanted to run upstairs and tear Buck Gallagher apart with my bare hands. But I looked at my son. He was terrified not for himself, but for what they could do to his future. If they committed him, he would lose his license. He would lose everything. "We need to be smart," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to get you out, but I need to destroy their leverage first." "Go back upstairs," Brent said. "Pretend you didn't see the chain. Pretend I am just sick. Please, Dad, they are watching on the nanny cam." He pointed to a small blinking light on the shelf behind the boxes. I realized then that I had walked into a trap. If I tried to carry him out, they would stop me. There were 20 people upstairs, and Buck was a big man, and they had the legal papers. I nodded slowly. I understood. I had to play the game. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I am coming back for you," I whispered. "I promise you on your mother's grave I am coming back, and I am bringing hell with me." I stood up. I wiped the tears from my face. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders slump. I relaxed my jaw. I transformed myself from Harlan Cross, the founder of a construction empire, into Harlan Cross, the confused, scared old man they thought I was. I turned around and walked back toward the stairs. I stopped at the nanny cam. I looked right into the lens, and I blinked confusedly, as if I didn't know what it was. Then I went up into the light. When I opened the door to the hallway, Buck was waiting right there. "Well," he demanded, Did you see him? I let my hands shake. I hunched over. He looks terrible, I stammered, my voice wavering. He was sleeping. I didn't wake him. It smells bad down there, Buck. Is he okay? Buck laughed. A cruel barking sound. He is detoxing, Harlan. It gets messy. We are doing the best we can. It is a burden, you know, taking care of an addict. An addict. My son never even took Tylenol. I need a drink of water, I said, clutching my chest. My heart. The drive was too much. Come on then, Buck said, grabbing my shoulder and steering me into the kitchen. Get some water and then get out. The kitchen was crowded. Brittany was there, showing off a diamond ring to her friends. Oh, Harlan, you are still here, she said, her tone dripping with annoyance. I need water, I said. I grabbed a glass from the counter. My hand was shaking so much, water sloshed onto the floor. Look at him, Trish laughed from the doorway. He is making a mess. Honestly, Brittany, how do you deal with these people? Brittany rolled her eyes. Patience, Mom. Lots of patience. I drank the water. I needed to buy time. I needed to find the documents. Brent said he signed a power of attorney. If I could find where they kept it, I could figure out their timeline. I am feeling a little dizzy, I said. Can I just sit in the study for a minute, just to catch my breath before I drive back? Brittany sighed loud and long. Fine. 5 minutes. But do not touch anything. Brent hates when people mess up his desk. She pointed me toward the study down the hall. I shuffled away, looking frail and pathetic. As soon as I closed the study door behind me, I locked it. I moved fast. I went to Brent's mahogany desk. I tried the drawers. Locked. I pulled a multi-tool from my pocket. I always carry one. I jammed it into the lock mechanism of the center drawer and twisted. There was a satisfying click. I slid the drawer open. It was empty except for a few pens. I cursed. I looked around the room. There was a safe in the corner, but I didn't know the combination. Then I saw it. The wastebasket. It was full of crumpled papers. I started digging. I found drafts, practice signatures. Someone had been practicing signing Brent's name over and over again on legal pads. The handwriting looked loopy and feminine. Brittany. At the bottom of the bin, I found a crumpled sheet of paper that had been smoothed out and then discarded. It was a printout of an email from a real estate agent. Subject: Urgent Sale, Cross Residence. Body: Hi Brittany, as discussed, we can list the property on December 26th. Since you have the power of attorney, we can bypass the usual inspections. The cash offer from the developer is valid until New Year's Eve. We are looking at $1.2 million for the lot. They will demolish the house in January. They were selling the house. They were selling my son's home out from under him while he was chained in the basement. And then I found the second document. It was a draft of an application for involuntary commitment to the St. Jude Behavioral Health Center. It detailed a fictional history of drug abuse and violent outbursts. It was signed by Dr. Vance, a psychiatrist I knew by reputation as a man who would sign anything for the right price. I took photos of everything with my phone. My hands were steady now. The plan was forming in my head. They wanted to sell the house. They wanted the money. They thought they had total control. I needed backup. I unlocked my phone and opened a secure messaging app. I scrolled down to a contact listed only as Simon. Simon Keller was my head of security when I ran Cross Industries. He was ex-Special Forces, a man who could extract a hostage from a war zone without wrinkling his suit. He was currently running my private family office, managing the security of the trust. I typed a message. Code Winter. Location: Brent's house. Hostage situation. Target is Brent. Hostiles are armed with leverage, not guns. I need the team. And bring the lawyer. 30 minutes. I hit send. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then a reply. Rolling. I put the phone away. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, old, and harmless. Perfect. I unlocked the study door and walked back out into the party. It was time for dinner. Brittany was clapping her hands. "Everyone, dinner is served. Come to the dining room," she looked at me. "Oh, Harlan, we didn't set a place for you, but you can sit at the kids' table in the kitchen if you want. Or you can just leave." I smiled a weak, trembling smile. "Actually, Brittany," I said, raising my voice just enough to be heard over the chatter, "I would love to join you for a moment. I have a Christmas present for you, for all of you." Buck laughed. "What is it, old man?" "A bag of pine cones," I said, reaching into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out my checkbook. The room went quiet. A checkbook is a language everyone understands, especially greedy people. I walked to the head of the dining table. I laid the checkbook down. "I know I have been a burden," I said, keeping my head down. "I know Brent is struggling. I want to help. I sold the cabin and the land." Brittany's eyes widened. "You sold the land?" "Yes, I lied. I got a good price." I picked up a pen. I wrote a check. I made sure my hand movements were large and visible. I wrote the number 1 followed by 6 zeros. $1 million. I tore the check out and held it up. "For the grandchild," I said. "I know you are trying, Brittany. This is for the future." Brittany practically lunged across the table. Her eyes were glued to the piece of paper. $1 million was enough to solve their immediate problems. It was enough to pay off whatever debts Buck had racked up. She snatched the check from my hand. She looked at it. She smiled a greedy, predatory smile. "Wow, Harlan," she said, her voice breathless. "This is generous." "There is just one thing," I said. "What I made it out to Brent Cross." Brittany's face fell. "He needs to endorse it," I said innocently. "For the deposit. You know how the banks are." Brittany looked at the check, then at her mother, then at Buck. "No problem," she said quickly. "I have power of attorney. I can endorse it for him." "Are you sure?" I asked. "I thought he had to sign." "No," Buck shouted. "She has the power. She can sign." "Do it, Brittany. Sign the damn thing." Brittany grabbed a pen from the sideboard. She flipped the check over. Right there in front of 20 witnesses, in front of her parents. In front of me, she forged my son's signature on the back of a $1 million check. She handed it to Buck, who held it up like a trophy. "There," he said. "Done. Now why don't you get out of here, Harlan? We have celebrating to do." I looked at my watch. 29 minutes had passed. I stopped hunching. I straightened my back. I rolled my shoulders back and let the years fall off me. I looked Buck Gallagher in the eye, and for the first time he saw the man who had crushed unions and negotiated billion-dollar contracts. "I don't think I will go anywhere, Buck," I said. My voice was different now. It was deep, resonant, and cold as the grave. Buck frowned, confused by the change. "Excuse me," I pointed at the check in his hand. "You just committed bank fraud, felony forgery, and theft over $100,000. And you did it in front of a room full of witnesses." Buck lowered the check. "What are you talking about?" "And Brittany," I continued, turning to her. "You claim to have power of attorney because Brent is incapacitated. Yet you just signed a check endorsing a deposit into his account, which implies he is competent enough to accept a gift. Which is it? Is he crazy or is he rich? You can't have it both ways in a court of law." "Who do you think you are talking to?" Trish shrieked, stepping forward. "Get out of my house! It's not your house!" I roared. The sound made the crystal glasses on the table shake. "And it's not Brent's house either." Brittany froze. "What, I bought this house," I said, stepping closer to her. "I bought it through a holding company called CI Trust. Brent pays $1 a year in rent. It is a leasehold. And guess what is in the lease agreement?" I pulled a folded paper from my back pocket. Clause 4A. Immediate eviction upon engagement in criminal activity on the premises. I looked at Buck. Kidnapping, assault, and forgery count as criminal activity. Buck laughed nervously. You are bluffing. You are a broke old man with a truck that barely runs. Am I? I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The front door exploded inward. It didn't open. It shattered off its hinges. 6 men in tactical gear poured into the room. They weren't police. They were private security contractors. They moved with a speed and violence that made the guests scream and drop their plates. Simon Keller walked in through the smoke and debris. He was wearing a cashmere coat and holding a briefcase. He looked at Buck and nodded to his men. Secure them. 2 guards slammed Buck face first onto the dining table right into the mashed potatoes. 2 more grabbed Trish, who started screaming about her dress. Brittany tried to run toward the kitchen, but Simon stepped in her path. Sit down, Mrs. Cross, Simon said calmly, pushing her into a chair. The guests were panicking, huddling in the corners. Nobody leaves, I shouted. You are all witnesses. Sit down and shut up, I pointed to the basement door. Simon, get him. Simon motioned to 2 of his men. They disappeared down the hall. Buck was struggling on the table. You can't do this. This is assault. I know people. You know loan sharks, Buck, I said, leaning down so my face was inches from his. I know them too. In fact, I bought your debt this morning. Buck stopped struggling. You what $500,000 to the Venetti brothers. I wired the money at 9 a.m. You owe me now, Buck, and I am calling in the loan. I stood up and looked at his Mercedes parked outside. I am taking the car. I am taking the house. I am taking everything. Just then, the basement door opened. The guards carried Brent up the stairs in the wheelchair. They had cut the chain with bolt cutters. He was blinking in the bright light of the chandelier. He looked at the chaos, the security team, the crying in-laws, and then he looked at me. Dad, he whispered. I walked over to him. I put my hand on his shoulder. It's over, son. I told you I would come back. Brent looked at Brittany. She was crying, mascara running down her face. Baby, please, she sobbed. He is crazy. Tell them to stop. Brent looked at his broken leg. He looked at the check lying on the table with his forged signature. He looked at me. Did you save the videos, he asked. Simon stepped forward, opening his briefcase. We scrubbed the cloud, sir. The videos are gone. And we recovered the original hard drive from the study. Brent closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. Then he looked at his wife. I want a divorce, he said, and I want to press charges. The police sirens started wailing in the distance. The real police. My friend the sheriff was on his way to clean up the mess we had secured. I looked at Buck, Trish, and Brittany. They were broken. Their greed had been their trap, and I had just sprung it. Merry Christmas, I said. I wheeled my son out of the house into the cold, clean air of the winter night, leaving the ruins of their false kingdom behind us. My hands were shaking not from the cold that had seeped into my bones during the drive, but from a rage so pure and white-hot it felt like I had swallowed a live coal. I looked at the heavy iron chain biting into my son's ankle, the raw red skin around the metal, and the heavy master lock securing it to the cast iron pipe. For a split second, the world narrowed down to a single violent point. I was going to go upstairs. I was going to find the fire poker I had seen by the hearth, and I was going to end Buck Gallagher's life in front of his wife and daughter. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical impulse, a muscle memory, from a life I thought I had left behind, the part of me that had fought in union brawls and stared down corrupt city inspectors in the 80s. I reached for the chain, my fingers scrabbling uselessly against the cold steel, my breath coming in jagged gasps. I am getting you out of here, I growled, the sound barely recognizable as my own voice. I am going to tear this house down brick by brick if I have to. I am going to kill them, Brent. I am going to kill them all. No. Brent hissed, his hand shooting out to grip my wrist. His fingers were ice cold, his grip surprisingly weak, like a bird's claw. Stop, Dad. You can't. You have to listen to me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and my heart broke all over again. The fear in his eyes wasn't for himself. It was for me, and for something else I couldn't quite see yet. He was terrified, but there was a desperate, frantic intelligence behind the panic. They have leverage, Dad, he whispered, his eyes darting toward the ceiling, where the muffled thump of bass from the party music vibrated the floorboards. You don't understand what they have done. If you go up there swinging, if you call the police right now, they win. They will destroy everything. What leverage? I demanded, my voice rising despite my best efforts to keep it quiet. What could they possibly have that justifies chaining a man in his own basement? They have videos, Brent said, tears finally spilling over his bruised cheeks. They staged an intervention 3 days ago. Brittany. She slipped something into my tea. I don't know what it was, oxycodone maybe, or something stronger. I was out of it, Dad. I was slurring, stumbling, I couldn't walk. They filmed it. They filmed me falling into the wall. They filmed me shouting at them to get away from me, but on the video it just looks like I'm violent and high. I stared at him, the horror of it sinking in. It was a setup. A cold, calculated frame job. They have emails too, Brent continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. They hacked my laptop. They forged emails to my partners at the architecture firm, rambling, incoherent emails resigning my position, talking about demons and addiction. They sent them to the board, Dad. They told everyone I had a mental breakdown and relapsed on painkillers. If you call the cops, they show the videos. They show the emails. They tell the police I'm a danger to myself and others. They will have me committed to the St. Jude Behavioral Health Center. St. Jude. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the unwanted, a place where people went in and never came out the same. They have the paperwork ready, Brent choked out. An involuntary commitment order. They just need a doctor to sign off on the final transport, and they have Dr. Vance in their pocket. If I go in there, Dad, I lose my license. I lose my reputation. I lose my life. I'll never design another building. I'll be the junkie architect who went crazy. The trap was perfect. It was diabolical. They hadn't just captured his body. They had taken his future hostage. If I acted like the angry father, I played right into their narrative. The violent, enabling father of the drug addict son. I felt the rage inside me shift. It didn't disappear, but it changed state. It went from a wildfire to a glacier, heavy, unstoppable, crushing. This was not a fistfight. This was a demolition project. And you don't demolish a building by swinging a hammer blindly. You find the load-bearing walls. You plant the charges. You wait. I took a deep breath, forcing the air into my lungs, forcing my heart rate to slow. I looked at the nanny cam blinking on the shelf, its little red eye watching us. Okay, I whispered. Okay, son. I hear you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I kept my body turned away from the camera, shielding the screen. I need evidence, I said softly. If we are going to beat them, I need to prove this isn't a medical quarantine. I need to prove this is kidnapping. I moved quickly. I pulled the remnants of the duct tape from his cheek, careful not to tear the skin further. I angled my phone and took a close-up photo of the raw, blistered skin, where the adhesive had burned him. I took a picture of his split lip, the purple and yellow bruising blooming across his eye socket. Then I moved to the leg. The cast was a monstrosity. It wasn't medical-grade plaster. It was construction plaster, the kind used for walls rough and thick. I took a picture of the toes, swollen and dark. Buck did this, I asked, my voice flat, deadly. A 9-iron Brent whispered, closing his eyes. He laughed when he did it. He said if I couldn't walk, I couldn't run away. I documented the chain. I took a clear, high-resolution photo of the padlock, the way the lynx dug into his flesh, the rust on the pipe. This was the smoking gun. No doctor in the world would prescribe a towing chain for a broken leg. I put the phone back in my pocket. I had the ammunition. Now I needed to position the weapon. "I have to leave you here," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Just for a little while. I cannot take you out yet. Not until I neutralize their threat." Brent nodded, a fresh wave of tears hitting his eyes. "I know. Please, Dad. Just be careful. They are watching." I stood up. I looked down at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who had built libraries. He looked so small in that wheelchair. "I am coming back," I said. "And when I do, God help them." I turned away before I could change my mind. I walked toward the stairs, and with every step I began to change. I let my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting my jaw hang slightly slack. I made my hands tremble. I dragged my left foot just a fraction, adding a shuffle to my gait. I was no longer Harlan Cross the tycoon. I was Harlan the hillbilly. I was the confused, overwhelmed old man they wanted me to be. I was the victim. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, right in front of the camera lens. I stared into it, widening my eyes, feigning a look of bewildered sorrow. I let out a shaky sigh, audible enough for the microphone to pick up. I needed them to see a broken man, not a dangerous one. I needed them to think they had won, that I was just another pawn on their board, easily manipulated, easily dismissed. I reached for the doorknob. My hand hovered there for a second. I closed my eyes and visualized a vault door slamming shut on my anger, locking it away tight until it was time to unleash it. Then I opened the door and stepped out of the darkness and into the light of their party. I emerged from the shadows of the hallway and stepped into the blinding glare of the crystal chandelier, like a man walking from a grave into a circus. The air in the great room was thick and suffocating hot, with the press of bodies, and heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted meat. The bass of the music thumped against my ribs, vibrating the very floorboards that my son was chained beneath. I paused at the edge of the carpet, letting my eyes dart around the room with the feigned bewilderment of a senile old man. Buck Gallagher was holding court near the fireplace. He stood with one foot on the hearth, a crystal tumbler of my son's best scotch in his hand, looking for all the world like the lord of the manor. He spotted me immediately. His eyes narrowed and a cruel smirk spread across his flushed face. He turned to the group of guests around him, men in suits and women in cocktail dresses, who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Well, look who finally wandered back from the abyss," Buck boomed, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Did you get lost, old-timer?" I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my posture until I felt small and frail. I clasped my hands together to hide their steadiness, forcing them to tremble. I looked at the floor, then up at Buck with wide, watery eyes. "I am sorry," I stammered, my voice cracking perfectly. "I got turned around. There are so many doors. I tried to find the kitchen. I am so thirsty." Buck laughed, a harsh, barking sound that made the guests chuckle nervously along with him. He walked over to me, his velvet loafers crunching on the hardwood. He draped a heavy arm around my shoulders, not in friendship, but with the heavy, possessive grip of a butcher handling a side of beef. "He is thirsty," he announced to the room, treating me like a prop in his comedy routine. "He gets confused, folks. The mind is not what it used to be. It is sad, really. Brent has to deal with this constantly. The burden of a father who does not even know what day it is." I stared at the buttons on his tuxedo shirt, forcing myself to breathe shallowly, forcing the rage deep down into my gut. "I just need a glass of water," I whispered. "Please." Buck steered me toward the center of the room, parading me in front of his friends. "You see this," he said, gesturing at me with his drink. "This is why we had to step in. Brent comes from weak stock. Good kid, but he has no spine and he has too much baggage. He gestured around the room at the high ceilings and the custom crown molding. This house is too much for him. He is drowning in debt, folks. Up to his eyeballs. He took a long sip of scotch and leaned in as if sharing a secret with the room. But do not worry about us. We are family. We are stepping up. Brent is signing the deed over to us tomorrow. It is a foreclosure save, really. We are doing him a favor. This place will be the new Gallagher estate by New Year's Day. The guests murmured in appreciation, nodding at Buck's supposed generosity. I kept my head down, but my mind was sharpening, honing in on every word. He thought he was winning. He thought he was the shark in the tank. He had no idea he was swimming with a leviathan. Buck Gallagher did not know that 3 hours ago, before I got in my truck, I had made a phone call to a man in Chicago, a man who specializes in distressed assets. I knew Buck's construction firm was leveraged to the hilt. I knew he had taken out high-interest loans to fund this lavish lifestyle, to buy those velvet suits and lease those cars. I knew because I still had friends in the industry, and word travels fast. I bought his debt. Every dime he owed to the banks, every outstanding lien, every promissory note. I bought it all for 40 cents on the dollar. Technically speaking, I owned the shirt on his back. I owned the car he drove here in. I owned the very shoes he was using to stand tall in my son's house. He was bragging about stealing a house from a man he had chained in the basement, while standing next to the man who held the mortgage on his soul. I coughed a dry, rattling sound that made a woman in a sequined dress step back in disgust. Water, I rasped. Brittany appeared from the crowd. She moved like a viper, smooth and silent. She was holding a silver platter piled high with half-eaten appetizers, shrimp tails, discarded olives, crusts of bread, the detritus of their feast. She stopped in front of me, blocking my path. She looked at her father, and then at me. Her eyes were cold, dead things. There was no love in them, not for her husband, and certainly not for me. There was only calculation. "You are thirsty, Harlan," she said, her voice sweet and poisonous. "Yes, Brittany. Just water." She tilted her head. "You know we are very busy. We are entertaining important people. We do not really have time to fetch drinks for uninvited guests." She looked down at the plate of garbage in her hand. "But you look hungry too," she said. "Did you eat today? Or do you just scavenge whatever you can find?" She picked up a piece of bruschetta from the pile. It was soggy, the tomato sliding off the bread. Someone had taken a bite out of it and put it back. "Eat this," she said, holding it out to me. I looked at the food. I looked at her. She was testing me. She wanted to see how far she could push. She wanted to prove to everyone in the room that I was beneath them, that I was an animal to be fed scraps. If I refused, I would break character. A proud man would slap it away. A confused, helpless old man would be grateful. I have to do this, I thought, for Brent. I have to make them believe I am nothing. I reached out with a trembling hand. "Thank you, Brittany," I whispered. "You are a good girl." I took the soggy bread. I put it in my mouth. It tasted of stale garlic and humiliation. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow. Brittany smiled, a genuine smile of triumph. She looked at her guests. "See," she said. "He is happy. We take good care of him even when he crashes our parties." She turned back to me, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "Now go sit in the corner, Harlan. Be a good dog and stay out of the way, or I will have Daddy throw you out in the snow." She pointed to a small wooden chair in the far corner of the room, away from the food and the warmth of the fire. I nodded mutely. I shuffled toward the chair, my head bowed. Behind me, the party resumed. The music swelled. I heard Buck laugh again, a loud booming sound that echoed off the walls. "He ate the garbage," Buck roared. "Did you see that?" He ate it right out of her hand. I sat in the hard wooden chair. I folded my hands in my lap. I watched them. I watched Trish Gallagher admiring herself in the mirror, touching the pearls that had belonged to my Molly. I watched Buck pour himself another glass of my scotch, spilling it on the rug. I watched Brittany posing for selfies with her friends, flashing the diamond ring my son had worked 2 years to buy her. They were vultures picking at a carcass they thought was dead. They were gorging themselves on the life of a man they had broken. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot to check the pulse. I sat there, and I let the hate crystallize. I let it harden into a diamond of pure focus. I checked my watch. 15 minutes. 15 minutes until Simon and the team arrived. 15 minutes until the facade crumbled. I needed one last thing. I needed the final nail in their coffin. Brent had told me about the power of attorney, but I needed to know exactly where it was. I needed to know the timeline. I scanned the room. Buck was careless. He was drunk on power and alcohol. He had left his jacket on a chair near the dining table. I could see the edge of a thick envelope sticking out of the inner pocket. I knew what was in that envelope. It was the deed. It was the transfer papers. He was keeping them close, ready to wave them in people's faces. I needed to get to that jacket, but I couldn't just walk up and take it. I needed a distraction. Or better yet, I needed a reason to be there. I stood up slowly. I walked toward the hallway leading to the bathroom, which passed right by the dining table. "Hey, where are you going?" Buck shouted. "Bathroom," I mumbled, pointing down the hall. "Make it quick," Buck sneered, "and don't make a mess." I shuffled past the chair. I pretended to stumble. I reached out to steady myself, grabbing the back of the chair where the jacket hung. My hand slipped inside the pocket. My fingers brushed the cool, smooth paper of the envelope. I didn't take it. Not yet. That would be theft, and I needed to be cleaner than them. But I saw the return address on the envelope. Gallagher Construction and Demolition. It wasn't just a transfer. They weren't just selling the house. They were planning to demolish it. They were going to bulldoze my son's life into the dirt so they could sell the empty lot to a developer. I pulled my hand back empty. I stumbled again, righting myself. "Careful, old man," Brittany called out, laughing. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was gray and weathered. He looked tired, but his eyes were burning. I pulled out my phone. "Status," I typed. 1 minute, Simon replied. "Team is in position. Breach on your signal." I put the phone away. I washed my hands. I dried them carefully. I unlocked the door. It was time to go back out there. It was time to give them one last chance to dig their own graves. It was time for the wolf to shed the sheepskin. I opened the bathroom door and stepped back into the lion's den, ready to tear it apart from the inside out. I stepped out of the bathroom and the wall of noise hit me instantly. The party had reached a fever pitch. Someone had turned the music up, a thumping bass line that rattled the crystal in the cabinets, vibrating through the soles of my work boots. Laughter pealed out from the living room, sharp and jagged, the sound of people who thought they had gotten away with murder. I stood there for a moment in the hallway, leaning against the wainscoting, letting my chest heave, letting my hands tremble visibly. I needed one more thing. I had the photos of my son chained in the dark. I had the knowledge of Buck's financial ruin, but I needed the paper trail. I needed the physical proof of their intent to erase my son's existence before I dropped the hammer. I needed to get into that study. Brittany was coming down the hall, a half-empty bottle of champagne swinging from her hand. She spotted me and her lip curled in disgust. "Still here, Harlan," she slurred slightly. "I thought you were leaving. Or dying. Honestly, at this point, I don't care which." I clutched my chest, letting my knees buckle just enough to look like I was losing the battle with gravity. I gasped, a wet, rattling sound that I had heard my own father make before his heart gave out. I need to sit down," I wheezed. "Just for a minute, Brittany. My head. The room is spinning. She rolled her eyes, but she didn't want a corpse in her hallway interrupting the festivities. She gestured vaguely toward the heavy oak door on the left. "Fine," she snapped. "Go in the study. Sit on the chair. Do not touch anything on the desk. Brent goes crazy if his papers are moved. And do not bleed on the rug." She pushed past me, the smell of expensive alcohol and cheap ambition trailing in her wake. I stumbled toward the study door, grasping the brass handle with a shaking hand. I opened it, slipped inside, and closed it softly behind me. The lock clicked with a satisfying weight. The silence was sudden and heavy. The study was soundproofed, a feature I had insisted on when I secretly renovated the house for Brent years ago. I leaned against the door and dropped the act. My spine straightened. My breathing slowed. I was not a frail old man anymore. I was a hunter in the blind. I moved to the desk. It was a beautiful piece, solid mahogany covered in stacks of paper that had been shoved aside to make room for Buck's cigar ashtray. The ash was spilled over the polished wood. Disrespectful. I sat in my son's chair. I tried the center drawer. Locked. I pulled the multi-tool from my pocket again. The lock was a simple mechanism designed to keep out curious children, not a determined father. 2 twists, and it popped open. I slid the drawer out. There they were, the keys to the kingdom they thought they had stolen. The first file was a thick blue folder labeled medical. I opened it. It wasn't medical records. It was an application for involuntary commitment to the St. Jude Behavioral Health Center. I scanned the pages, my blood turning to ice. Patient history. Long-term opiate abuse, violent outbursts, paranoia, delusions of persecution. It was all lies. Every single word. They had crafted a narrative of a madman to hide the fact that they were the ones driving him to the brink. And there on the bottom line was the signature of Dr. Vance, the corrupt psychiatrist Brent had warned me about. The date was for tomorrow. They were shipping him out in the morning. I set the file aside, my hands steady with cold rage. The next document was a general power of attorney. It granted Brittany Gallagher full, unrestricted control over Brent's assets, his medical decisions, and his property. I looked at the signature line, Brent Cross. The signature was shaky, erratic. It looked like it had been written by a hand in extreme pain, or perhaps guided by another hand. I remembered the cast on his leg the 9-iron Buck had used. They had tortured him until he signed. This wasn't a legal document. It was a confession of torture written in ink. And underneath that, the final piece of the puzzle. A real estate contract. Urgent sale agreement. Cash offer. Closing date December 26th. They were selling the house the day after Christmas. The price was listed at $1.2 million. It was half of what the property was worth. They were dumping it for quick cash, desperate to liquidate everything before anyone asked questions. They were going to sell his home, lock him in a padded room, and vanish with the money. I took out my phone. I photographed every page. The signatures, the dates, the lies. I had everything I needed to send them to prison for the rest of their miserable lives. But prison was too good for them. I wanted to break them first. I opened the secure messaging app again. The signal was strong. I typed 3 words. Target package secured. I waited. The ellipsis danced on the screen. Then a reply from Simon. Winter protocol is active. Perimeter secure. We are 30 seconds out. 30 seconds. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was time. I stood up and put the files back in the drawer, but I left it slightly open. I wanted them to find it later. I wanted them to know that I had seen it all. I walked to the window and looked out at the snowy driveway. I couldn't see them yet, but I knew they were there. My team. Men I had worked with for decades. Men who knew the difference between right and wrong and didn't mind getting their hands dirty to enforce it. I unlocked the study door. I put the mask back on. The hunch, the tremor, the fear. I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. The music was louder now, a crescendo of celebration. They were toasting to their success, to their cleverness, to the old man they thought they had fooled. I walked toward the dining room, my boots heavy on the floor. Enjoy it while it lasts, I thought. The bill is coming due, and I am the collector. I walked into the dining room, and for a moment, the sheer gluttony of the scene almost made me break character. The table was a long slab of polished oak groaned under the weight of silver platters. There was prime rib swimming in au jus, roasted pheasants, with their feathers still stuck in them, as decoration, and towers of shellfish on ice that was already starting to melt. It looked like a medieval banquet for people who had never known a day of hunger in their lives. Buck was already seated at the head of the table, a napkin tucked into his collar like a bib. He was red-faced and sweating grease, holding a fork like a weapon. Trish was to his right, already picking at a lobster tail with her manicured fingers. The guests were filing in, laughing and jostling for seats, their eyes scanning the spread with hungry anticipation. I moved toward an empty chair near the center of the table. It was a simple instinct. I was the father of the host. In any civilized home that would earn me a seat. Brittany intercepted me before I could even touch the wood. She moved with that jagged, nervous energy of someone trying to keep a house of cards from falling down in a windstorm. She placed a hand flat on my chest, stopping me dead. "What do you think you are doing, Harlan?" She hissed, her voice low so the guests wouldn't hear the venom. I looked at the chair and then at her. "I am going to eat Brittany. It is Christmas Eve." She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Oh no, you are not sitting here. This table is for the adults. For the people who actually contributed to this evening." She pointed a manicured finger toward the kitchen door. "We set up a card table in the pantry," she said. "You can sit there, or you can take a plate to the garage. I really do not care which, just get out of the sight line. You are depressing the guests." I looked at the kitchen. Through the swinging door, I could see a rickety folding table set up next to the dog bowls. There was a paper plate on it. They wanted to treat me like a dog. They wanted to break my spirit before they broke my bank account. I looked back at Buck. He was watching us chewing on a piece of shrimp with his mouth open. He winked at me. "Go on, old-timer," he called out. "The dog food is fresh." That was it. The final insult. The click of the safety coming off. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not shuffle. I did not apologize. I stepped around Brittany. I walked to the head of the table right next to Buck. I stood there looming over him until he stopped chewing. The chatter in the room died down. People sensed the shift in air pressure. They sensed that the old man in the flannel shirt was suddenly taking up a lot more space than he should. I picked up a crystal wine glass from the table. I picked up a silver spoon. Clink, clink, clink. The sound cut through the room like a chime. Silence fell. 20 faces turned toward me. Some annoyed, some amused, some just waiting for the senile old man to embarrass himself. I looked at them all. I looked at Trish with my wife's pearls around her neck. I looked at Buck with my son's liquor in his gut. I looked at Brittany with the deed to my house in her pocket. "Before we eat," I said, my voice booming. It was not the wavering voice of a sick old man. It was the voice that had shouted orders over the roar of jackhammers and diesel engines for 40 years. It was a voice of command. Buck frowned his fork halfway to his mouth. "Sit down, Harlan, you are making a scene." I ignored him. "I have a gift," I announced, "for the family." I reached into the inside pocket of my Carhartt jacket. I moved slowly, deliberately. I saw Brittany tense up, ready to call security or throw me out herself if I pulled out something embarrassing. I pulled out my checkbook. It was a simple leather-bound book worn at the edges. But to people like the Gallaghers, a checkbook is a holy object. I saw Buck's eyes flicker. He set his fork down. "Greed is a powerful reflex," It overrides caution every time. I opened the book. I smoothed it flat on the white tablecloth right next to the roast beef. I pulled a heavy black fountain pen from my pocket. I know I have been difficult, I said, letting a hint of the tremor back into my voice just enough to bait the hook. I know you think I am just a confused old hillbilly living in the woods. Brittany crossed her arms. Well, if the shoe fits Harlan. But I have been thinking, I continued, about legacy, about the future. Brent is struggling. I can see that. And I have been holding on to things I do not need. I looked up at Brittany. I sold the land I lied, the 40 acres up north, and the mineral rights. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. You what? Brittany breathed. I sold it, I repeated. Closed the deal yesterday. Cash buyer. It is all in the account. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She knew the land. She knew what timber and mineral rights were worth. She was doing the math, and the numbers were making her dizzy. Why, Buck asked, his voice hoarse. For the baby, I said softly. Brittany froze. What baby? The one you are going to give me someday, I said. My grandchild. Brent's child. I want to make sure they are taken care of. I want to make sure this family has what it deserves. I uncapped the pen. I bent over the check. I started to write. I made sure my hand was steady enough to be legible but shaky enough to look old. Pay to the order of Brent Cross. I wrote the date, December 25th, and then I moved to the amount line. I wrote a 1, then a comma, 3 zeros, another comma, 3 more zeros, $1 million. I wrote it out in longhand below just to be sure there was no confusion. 1,000,000 over $100. I tore the check from the book with a sharp ripping sound. It was the loudest noise in the room. I held it up. The light from the chandelier hit the wet ink. $1 million, I said, holding it out toward Brittany. For the future. Brittany didn't move at first. She stared at the slip of paper as if it were a winning lottery ticket floating in the breeze. Then she lunged. She didn't walk, she scrambled. She snatched the check from my fingers so fast, she almost gave me a paper cut. She stared at it. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. Her breathing was shallow. Oh my God, she whispered. Mom, Dad. Look, she showed it to Buck. Buck let out a low whistle. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't respect. It was hunger. The hunger of a wolf looking at a fat sheep. Well now, Harlan, Buck said, leaning back and wiping his mouth. Maybe I misjudged you. Maybe you are not so useless after all. Trish was already beaming, reaching out to touch the check. We can renovate the guest wing, she said. We can finally join the country club properly. They were spending it already. They hadn't even deposited it, and they were spending it. Wait, I said, holding up a hand. Brittany looked at me, clutching the check to her chest. What? There is a condition, I said. Buck's face darkened. What condition? You gave it to us. No take-backs, old man. I pointed to the check in Brittany's hand. I made it out to Brent, I said. It is a personal check. The bank will not accept it for deposit without his endorsement. Brittany looked down at the check. I saw the gears turning. So she said. So I need his signature, I said. I need the homeowner. I need my son to come up here and sign it. Or I need to go down there and have him sign it. This was the trap. If they let me go down there again, I would refuse to leave. I would make a scene. If they brought him up, everyone would see the broken leg, the bruises, the condition he was in. They couldn't let Brent be seen. Not by this crowd. Not in his state. But they wanted the money. God, how they wanted the money. Brittany looked at Buck. Buck looked at the check. The greed was warring with the fear. He is sleeping. Buck grunted. We can't wake him. He needs his rest. Then I guess I will take the check back, I said, reaching for it. I can't leave $1 million floating around uncashed. I will just wait until he is better. Maybe next week. Or next month. Brittany pulled the check away from my reach. No, you are not taking it back. Then have him sign it, I said simply. Brittany looked at the check. She looked at the guests who were watching this drama with fascination. She looked at me. And then she fell right into the pit I had dug for her. She smiled a sharp, arrogant smile. He doesn't need to sign it, Harlan, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You really are out of the loop, aren't you? What do you mean, I asked, playing the fool one last time. Brent isn't capable right now, she said loudly, addressing the room. His illness, it affects his mind. He is confused. He isn't lucid. That is why, she paused for dramatic effect. That is why he granted me full power of attorney. She said it like a queen announcing her coronation. I control his finances, Harlan. I control his assets. I control his signature. I can sign for him. Are you sure, I asked, pushing her just a little further. I thought only he could sign a personal gift. Don't be stupid, Buck snapped. It is legal. She has the papers. Sign it, Brittany. Deposit it tomorrow. We will put it in the joint account. Brittany walked to the sideboard. She grabbed a pen. She smoothed the check out on the polished wood surface. Everyone was watching. 20 witnesses. Her parents. Me. She flipped the check over to the endorsement line. She didn't sign her own name as power of attorney. She didn't write Brittany Cross POA. She signed Brent Cross. She forged his signature. She did it casually practiced. She had done it 100 times before on the practice sheets I found in the trash. She capped the pen. She turned around and held the check up triumphantly. There, she said. Done. Brent accepts your gift, Harlan. Thank you. She handed the check to Buck, who folded it and put it in his breast pocket right next to the deed to the house. Now, Buck said, clapping his hands together. That is settled. Harlan, why don't you grab a plate and head to the garage? We have celebrating to do. And frankly, you smell like a wet dog. I stood there. I looked at them. I looked at the guests. I took a deep breath. I let the air fill my lungs, expanding my chest. I felt the stoop in my back vanish. I felt the tremor in my hands cease. I looked at my watch. 0 hour. I looked Buck Gallagher dead in the eye. I don't think I will be going to the garage, Buck. Buck stopped smiling. He frowned, sensing the change in my tone. The sudden lack of quaver. The steel that had replaced the rust. Excuse me, he said. I stepped closer to the table. I picked up the wine glass I had used to call for attention. I looked at it, and then I threw it against the fireplace. It shattered with a violence that made half the room jump. That check is void, I said, my voice filling the room, echoing off the high ceilings. Buck stood up, knocking his chair back. What the hell is wrong with you? You are drunk. Get out before I throw you out. You are not throwing anyone out, I said. I pointed a finger at Brittany. You just committed a felony, Brittany. In fact, you committed 3. Forgery, fraud, and grand larceny. And you did it in front of a room full of witnesses. Brittany laughed, but it was a nervous, high-pitched sound. You gave it to me. You saw me sign it. I have power of attorney. Power of attorney allows you to act on someone's behalf, I roared. It does not allow you to forge their signature to embezzle funds into an account you control while you have them chained in a basement. The word chained hung in the air. The guests started to murmur. Chained, someone whispered. He is crazy. Buck shouted, his face turning purple. He is senile. Look at him, he is hallucinating. Am I asked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I held it up. I have pictures, Buck. I have pictures of the chain. I have pictures of the broken leg. I have pictures of the document you forced him to sign. I swiped the screen and turned it toward the guests. This is what they are hiding in the basement, I shouted, showing the photo of Brent's bloody ankle. This is their sick son-in-law. A woman screamed. A man stood up looking horrified. Buck lunged for me. Give me that phone. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The front door didn't just open. It exploded. The heavy oak frame splintered inward with a crash that sounded like a thunderclap. Wood chips and snow flew into the foyer. Through the debris came 6 men. They were dressed in black tactical gear, but they weren't police. They were bigger. They were faster. They moved with the precision of a scalpel. Leading them was Simon Keller. He walked through the ruin of the door wearing a charcoal wool coat, his face calm and terrifying. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand. He looked at Buck, who was frozen halfway across the room. Simon nodded once. Secure the room. The team fanned out. 2 men grabbed Buck before he could take another step. They slammed him face down onto the dining table, his nose crunching into the fine china. 2 more secured the exits, blocking the guests, who were now screaming and scrambling away from the table. Brittany tried to run for the kitchen. Simon simply stepped in her path. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her. She stopped trembling. Sit down, Mrs. Cross, Simon said. His voice was polite, but it left no room for argument. She sat. I looked at the chaos. I looked at the fear in their eyes. I walked over to Buck, who was struggling against the guards, pinning him to the table. Who are these people? Buck screamed, spitting mashed potatoes. Call the police, I leaned down close to his ear. I am the police tonight, Buck. I am the judge, and I am the jury. I stood up and pointed to the basement door. Get my son, I ordered. 2 of Simon's men nodded and disappeared into the hallway. I turned back to the room. Nobody leaves, I shouted. You wanted a party? You wanted a show? Well, you have a front row seat. Sit down and shut up. The room went silent. I looked at Brittany. She was pale, shaking, clutching the tablecloth. You thought I was a helpless old man, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You thought you could break my family and steal my life. I leaned in close. You should have done a background check, Brittany. I heard the sound of bolt cutters snapping from the basement. A heavy metallic clank. Then the sound of the wheelchair rolling across the floor. It was time for the truth. You think you won, Brittany. You think because you forged a signature on a piece of paper that you own me. You think you own my son. I reached out and snatched the check from Buck's pocket before he could even blink. The movement was so fast, so precise that he flinched, as if I had thrown a punch. Hey, he shouted, lunging forward. That is mine! Give it back! I did not step back. I did not cower. I looked at the check, the ink still wet where Brittany had committed a felony in front of 20 witnesses. I looked at her arrogant, confused face. And then I smiled. It was not the smile of a grandfather. It was the smile of a wolf who has just closed its jaws around the throat of a deer. It is a trap, you idiot, I growled. The sound of my voice made Brittany jump. It wasn't the wheezing, high-pitched rasp of the confused old man she had been mocking all night. It was deep. It was resonant. It was the voice that had commanded construction sites and silenced boardrooms for 40 years. It was a voice of absolute terrifying authority. I ripped the check in half. The sound was sharp and loud in the silent room. Then I ripped it again, and again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the prime rib like snow. You just signed a confession, I said, my voice booming off the vaulted ceiling. You just proved that you have control over his finances while simultaneously claiming he is incompetent. You proved intent to defraud. And you did it while I was recording everything. I tapped the small lens of the camera hidden in the button of my flannel shirt. Brittany's face drained of all color. She looked at the confetti of paper on the table and then at me. "Who are you?" she whispered. "You are supposed to be senile." "I am Harlan Cross," I said, stepping closer to her until she had to crane her neck to look me in the eye. "I built this town. I built this house, and tonight I am going to tear your world apart." Buck roared in anger. "I don't care who you are. Get out of my house before I kill you myself." He grabbed a steak knife from the table. The silver glinted in the light. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at the knife. I looked at the front door. "Now, Simon." The front door didn't just open. It disintegrated. The heavy oak panels shattered inward with a concussion that shook the wine in the glasses. Wood splinters and snow blasted into the foyer, followed instantly by 6 dark shapes moving with the fluid, lethal grace of predators. These were not police officers. They didn't shout warnings. They didn't read rights. They were my private security team men I had handpicked from the best special operations units in the country. They wore tactical black, their faces covered, their movements synchronized. Leading them was Simon Keller. He walked through the ruin of the doorframe, calmly stepping over the debris in his Italian leather shoes. He carried a thick leather briefcase in one hand, and he looked at the room with the bored detachment of a man who had seen everything. "Secure them," Simon said quietly. The room exploded into chaos. The guests screamed and scrambled backward, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks. But the team ignored them. They moved like guided missiles toward the targets I had identified. Buck tried to raise the knife. It was a mistake. One of the guards, a man named Miller who had served 3 tours in the sandbox, closed the distance in a blur of motion. He didn't strike Buck. He simply dismantled him. He grabbed Buck's wrist, twisted it, until the bone snapped with a sickening crack and slammed Buck's face into the dining table. Buck screamed a high-pitched wail of pain and shock as his nose crunched against the china platter. The mashed potatoes turned pink with his blood. "Stay down," Miller barked, pressing Buck's face harder into the food. "Do not move!" Trish started to shriek, clawing at her neck, trying to rip off the pearls. She knew. In that moment, she knew everything was over. 2 other guards flanked her. They didn't throw her to the ground, but they grabbed her arms and zip-tied her wrists behind her back so fast she didn't have time to finish her scream. "Sit down, Mrs. Gallagher," one of them said, forcing her into a chair. Brittany tried to run. She scrambled toward the kitchen door, her heels slipping on the polished floor. She was fast, but Simon was faster. He didn't run. He just stepped into her path, blocking the exit like a wall of granite. He held up a hand, palm out. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Cross?" Simon asked, his voice smooth and cold. Brittany backed away, hyperventilating. "Who are you people? You can't do this. This is kidnapping." Simon opened his briefcase. He pulled out a sheaf of papers stamped with the seal of the state court. "Actually, this is an eviction," he said calmly, "and a citizen's arrest for aggravated assault, kidnapping, and fraud. We are just holding you until the sheriff arrives to make it official." He pointed to a chair next to her mother. "Sit." Brittany collapsed into the chair, sobbing hysterically. The guests were huddled in the corners of the room, terrified, silent. "Nobody leaves," I announced, turning to face them. My voice was steady, iron hard. "You all watched. You watched them humiliate an old man. You watched them feast while my son rotted in the basement. You are all complicit. You will all give statements to the police. If anyone tries to leave, my men will stop you." I looked at the table. Buck was moaning into the tablecloth. Trish was weeping. Brittany was staring at nothing in shock. The party was over. The kingdom of lies they had built was burning down around them. But I wasn't done. The most important part was still waiting in the dark. I turned to Simon. "The basement," I said, pointing toward the hallway door. "He is chained to the pipe. They broke his leg, Simon. They broke it with a golf club." Simon's face didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He nodded once. "Miller Ramirez with me. Bring the bolt cutters. And bring the medic." I watched them go. I watched them head toward the door that led to the hell my son had been living in. I turned back to Buck. I grabbed a handful of his velvet hair and pulled his face out of the potatoes. He sputtered, blood and gravy dripping down his chin. "Look at me, Buck," I hissed. He opened his eyes, terrified. "You wanted to break him," I said. "You wanted to break my boy because he was too nice to fight back. You thought kindness was weakness." I leaned in closer until our noses were almost touching. "You forgot where he came from, Buck. You forgot who his father is. I am not nice. And I am going to break you into so many pieces they will need a broom to clean you up." I let his head drop back onto the table. Then I heard it. The sound of metal shearing metal echoing up from the basement. The snap of the heavy chain being cut. A moment later I heard a voice. Weak, hoarse, but alive. "Dad." I turned toward the hallway. My heart, which had been a stone in my chest for hours, finally started to beat again. "Bring him up," and I commanded, my voice thick with emotion. "Bring my son up here, right now." I wanted them to see him. I wanted Brittany to see the husband she had tortured. I wanted the guests to see the man whose house they were eating in. I wanted the world to see what these monsters had done. And then I was going to bury them. Miller and Ramirez emerged from the hallway, and the silence that fell over the room was heavier than the oak door I had just destroyed. They were supporting the wheelchair between them, lifting it slightly, to clear the transition from the hallway carpet to the dining room hardwood. The sound of the rubber wheels rolling across the floor was the only noise in the world. Brent was slumped in the chair. In the harsh light of the chandelier, he looked even worse than he had in the dark of the basement. His skin was the color of old parchment gray and translucent. The bruising around his eye had darkened to a deep, ugly purple that swallowed half his face. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He was shivering violently, the tremors shaking the entire wheelchair. But it was the leg that made the women in the room cover their mouths. The plaster cast was filthy, smeared with the dirt of the basement floor, and stained with dark fluids. And sticking out of the plaster right around the ankle was the remnant of the heavy iron chain. Miller had cut it, but a foot of it still dangled from his leg, a heavy steel tail that clanked against the floor with every rotation of the wheel. My son, the man who had designed the city library, who had won awards for his vision, was reduced to this. A prisoner in his own home, dragged out into the light like a specimen. A woman near the fireplace let out a sob. It was a sharp, horrified sound. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Look at his leg." Brittany stood up. She was shaking her face, a mask of pure panic. "Don't look at him," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He is sick. He is having an episode. Get him out of here. You are embarrassing him." She tried to rush toward the wheelchair, trying to block the guest's view with her own body. Simon didn't even look at her. He just extended one arm like a toll gate. Brittany ran into it and stopped dead. "Sit down, Mrs. Cross," Simon said. His voice was bored. I walked over to the corner where Buck had set up a karaoke machine for later in the evening. It was a flashy thing, with neon lights and a heavy wireless microphone. I picked up the mic. I flipped the switch. A high-pitched squeal of feedback cut through the room, making everyone wince. I adjusted the volume. "I want you all to look," I said. My voice was amplified, booming from the speakers, filling every corner of the house. I pointed at Brent. "Brittany told you he was sick. She told you he had the flu. She told the police he was a drug addict who relapsed." I walked toward the center of the room, the microphone gripped tight in my hand. "Look at the chain on his leg." I gestured to the steel links dragging on the floor. Does Dr. Vance prescribe heavy-duty towing chains for the flu? I asked. Is that the standard treatment for a relapse? To chain a human being to a water pipe in the dark for 3 days? Buck tried to lift his head from the table. He's dangerous, he mumbled through his broken nose. We had to restrain him. He was going to hurt someone. I looked at Buck. The blood from his nose was pooling on the white tablecloth, staining the expensive fabric he was so proud of. The only dangerous person in this house is you, Buck, I said. I turned back to the guests. They were paralyzed. They were holding their champagne flutes like they had forgotten they were holding them. They were witnessing a crime scene, and they knew it. You came here to eat his food, I said, my voice rising. You came here to drink his wine. You celebrated in his living room while he rotted 20 feet beneath you. I walked over to Brent. I put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then looked up at me. His eyes were unfocused, but he knew me. Dad, he whispered. I looked at Brittany. She was trembling, vibrating with terror. Tell them, I said into the mic. Tell them why you did it. Brittany stared at me. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an ally. She found neither. He fell, she stammered. He fell down the stairs. We didn't know what to do. He was screaming. We didn't want him to hurt himself. Lies, I roared. I motioned to Simon. Show them. Simon nodded. He walked to the massive 80-inch television mounted above the fireplace. He pulled an HDMI cable from the back of the karaoke machine and plugged it into a device he took from his briefcase. The screen flickered. The logo for the smart TV disappeared. And then an image appeared. It was shaky, grainy, and raw. It was the footage I had recorded with my phone just 30 minutes ago. The video started in the dark. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom of the basement. It swept across the stripped room, the boxes, the dust. And then it landed on Brent. On the massive screen in high definition, the horror was inescapable. The guests gasped as one. You could see the fear in Brent's eyes in the video. You could see the raw red skin where the duct tape had been ripped away. You could see the bruise in the shape of a golf club head on his shin. The video zoomed in. It focused on the padlock. It focused on the chain wrapped tight around the ankle bone, biting into the flesh. Then the audio kicked in, my voice from the video. Who did this? And Brent's voice weak and terrified. Buck. Buck did this. With a 9-iron. He swung it like a baseball bat. The video cut to the next clip. It was the photo of the documents I had found in the study. The commitment papers. The power of attorney with the forged signature. And finally, the email from the real estate agent. Demolish the house in January. I signaled Simon to pause the video on that image. The words, demolish the house, hovered over the room, glowing like a neon accusation. I lowered the microphone. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. They weren't protecting him, I said, my voice quiet now, deadly. They were erasing him. I looked at the guests. They forged his signature to get power of attorney. They broke his leg so he couldn't run. They chained him up so he couldn't scream. And tomorrow morning they were going to ship him to a mental institution and sell this house for cash. I pointed at Brittany. She is not a grieving wife. She is a black widow. She was going to bury him alive in the system and spend his money before the ink was dry on the commitment papers. Brittany shook her head frantically. No, that's not true. He is sick. You don't understand. He is an addict. I walked over to her. I loomed over her chair. An addict, I asked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small plastic bag Simon had given me earlier. Inside was a hair follicle test kit. We are going to test him right now, I said. Miller is a certified medic. We will take a sample. And when it comes back clean, Brittany, when it proves there are no drugs in his system, What will your defense be then? Brittany opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She knew. She knew the game was rigged against her because she had built the game on lies, and I had just brought the truth. The guests started to move. It was a slow ripple at first, then a wave. People were putting down their glasses. They were grabbing their coats. They were backing away from the table, away from the Gallaghers, as if greed was contagious. "I'm leaving." A man said, his face pale. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "Sit down," I barked into the mic. The man froze. "You are witnesses," I said. "You saw the check she forged. You saw the condition of my son. You are not leaving until the sheriff takes your statements. If you leave now, you are accessories to a felony." The man sat down. I looked at Brent. He was weeping softly, his head in his hands. I looked at Buck, who was still pinned to the table, his blood mixing with the gravy. I looked at Trish, who was staring at the screen, staring at the proof of their monstrosity. "This is your legacy," I said to them. "This is what you built." I turned to the camera I had hidden on my person, the one that was still recording everything live to a cloud server Simon controlled. And now I said, "We are going to tear it down." I heard the sirens then, not in the distance but in the driveway. Blue and red lights flashed against the snow outside the window. The cavalry had arrived, but the war was already won. The truth was out, and it was uglier than sin. The sirens grew louder, wailing like banshees in the snowstorm, and for a brief second, Brittany Gallagher thought they were her salvation. The panic that had paralyzed her when the video played seemed to snap, and she lunged forward, her face twisted into a mask of entitlement that was almost impressive in its delusion. She ignored the security guards. She ignored the sobbing guests. She even ignored the husband she had tortured. She pointed a shaking finger at me and screamed. "This is my house," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are trespassing, Harlan. You and your thugs. Get out. Get out right now. When the police walk through that door, I am going to have you arrested for home invasion." She turned to the guests, looking for validation, desperate to pull them back onto her side. "He is lying," she yelled. "He hacked the TV. That video is fake. This is my property. My name is on the mortgage. I want him gone." I looked at Simon. He was standing by the fireplace, holding the leather briefcase like a shield. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had played this hand 1,000 times and never lost. "Simon," I said, my voice cutting through Brittany's screeching, "would you please educate my daughter-in-law on the finer points of property law?" Simon stepped forward. He placed the briefcase on the coffee table right next to the untouched hors d'oeuvres. The click of the latches opening was loud in the sudden silence. Brittany stopped screaming. She looked at the briefcase, then at Simon. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Simon pulled out a thick document bound in blue legal paper. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Brittany with the pity one might show a child who has just run into a glass door. "You are mistaken, Mrs. Cross," Simon said, his voice smooth as velvet. "You do not have a mortgage. There is no mortgage." Brittany laughed, a frantic, broken sound. "Of course there is. We pay it every month. $3,000 to the bank." Simon shook his head. "You pay $3,000 a month to a shell corporation managed by a bank," he corrected. "But that is not a mortgage payment, Brittany. That is a service fee, maintenance, taxes, insurance." He opened the document and turned it around so she could see the bold text at the top. "This house," he said, tapping the paper, "does not belong to Brent. And it certainly does not belong to you. It belongs to the Cross Family Irrevocable Trust." Brittany stared at the words. "Trust." I stepped closer to her. I wanted to see the exact moment the ground opened up beneath her feet. "I bought this house 5 years ago, Brittany," I said. "I bought it with cash the day Brent proposed to you. I put it in the trust because I knew deep down in my gut that a woman like you would eventually try to take it." I didn't tell Brent because I wanted him to feel independent. I wanted him to feel like a man providing for his family. But I never took my name off the deed. Simon flipped the page. Brent isn't the owner, Simon continued. He is the tenant. He signed a lease agreement the day he moved in. It is a lifetime lease for the sum of $1 per year plus maintenance costs. $1, Buck sputtered from the dining table where he was still pinned down. You are lying. That house is worth $1.5 million. It is worth $1.8, I corrected. And it is mine. Every brick, every beam, every shingle. Simon pulled out a single sheet of paper from the back of the file. It was a termination notice. The ink was still fresh. And this brings us to the problem, Simon said. Clause 14, Section B of the lease agreement. The tenant and any occupants agree that no criminal activity shall take place on the premises. Violation of this clause results in immediate lease termination and eviction without notice. Simon looked at the video still frozen on the screen, the image of the chain around Brent's leg. Kidnapping, assault, and torture definitely count as criminal activity, Mrs. Cross. He handed the paper to Brittany. She took it, her hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. I don't understand, she whispered. I leaned in close. It means you are homeless, Brittany. I checked my watch. Actually, I said. Simon filed the termination electronically 5 minutes ago. Which means for the last 5 minutes, you haven't been residents. You have been trespassers. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her looking like a wax doll left too close to a fire. Trespassing, she squeaked. Aggravated criminal trespass, I said. You are occupying a property you have no legal right to be in while holding the owner's son hostage. When the sheriff walks through that door, he isn't going to ask you for your side of the story. He is going to ask me if I want to press charges for intrusion. And the answer, Brittany, is yes. Buck started to struggle again, his face purple with rage. This is a trick. You can't just evict us on Christmas. There are laws. Squatters' rights, I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. Squatters' rights do not apply to kidnappers, Buck, I said. And they certainly do not apply when the landlord has an army of witnesses testifying that you turned the basement into a dungeon. The blue lights of the police cruisers were flashing against the living room walls, now painting us all in strobes of red and blue. Heavy footsteps pounded on the front porch. Brittany looked at the door, then back at me. Her arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was the terrified realization that she had gambled everything on a hand she didn't even hold. She looked at the house around her, the high ceilings she loved, the fireplace she posed in front of, the kitchen where she entertained her friends. She realized she had never owned any of it. She had been a guest in my house, treating me like a beggar while sleeping under my roof. But my things, she stammered, tears streaming down her face. My clothes, my jewelry. I looked at the pile of presents under the tree. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger. Those were bought with my son's money, I said. Money you stole. Money you extorted. As far as I am concerned, everything in this house is evidence. The front door kicked open again. This time it was the sheriff. Big Jim Miller, a man I had fished with for 20 years. He walked in, his hand on his holster, followed by 4 deputies. He looked at the shattered doorframe, the private security team, the guests cowering in the corner. Then he looked at me. Harlan Jim said, his voice grave. Dispatch said you called in a code winter. What the hell is going on here? I pointed at Brittany. I want these people removed from my property, Sheriff, I said. They are trespassing. And Jim, you better send a team to the basement. You are going to want to see the crime scene before they try to clean it up. Jim looked at the screen. He saw the photo of the chain. He looked at Brent in the wheelchair, broken and bleeding. His face went hard as granite. Deputies, Jim barked. Cuff them. All three of them. Brittany screamed as the deputy grabbed her arm. It wasn't a scream of anger anymore. It was the scream of someone watching their life end. No, you can't. This is my house. Tell them, Harlan. Tell them we are family. I turned my back on her. I walked over to Brent. I put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. She isn't family, son, I said softly. Not anymore. Brent looked up at me. His eyes were clear for the first time in hours. He looked at the lease agreement lying on the floor where Brittany had dropped it. You owned it the whole time, he whispered. I nodded. I am sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted you to feel like it was yours. Brent looked at Brittany being handcuffed, her face pressed against the wall. He looked at the house that had become his prison. Thank God you owned it, Dad, he said. Thank God. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the best Christmas carol I had ever heard. The Gallaghers weren't just losing a house. They were losing their freedom, and they were losing it on my terms. Buck was cuffed, his face pressed against the wainscoting, but the realization of his eviction had finally pierced his alcohol-soaked brain. He twisted his head around, trying to make eye contact with me, desperate to find a lever he could pull to stop the freefall. Harlan, wait, he wheezed, his voice taking on a pathetic, wheedling tone that was even more repulsive than his arrogance. Let us be reasonable here. We are family. You can't just throw us out in the snow on Christmas Eve. Think about the optics. Think about the scandal. We can work this out. I can pay you rent. I can fix the leg. We are men of the world, Harlan. We don't need police. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taken a 9-iron to my son's shin bone. Family. I repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. You are right, Buck. Family helps family. Buck's eyes lit up. He thought he had found an opening. Exactly. We made mistakes, sure. But we were desperate. The economy is tough. You understand debt, Harlan. You were a businessman. You know what it is like to have creditors breathing down your neck. I nodded slowly. I do know, Buck. I know exactly what it is like. And I know exactly who your creditors are because I spoke to them at 8 o'clock this morning. Buck froze. What I signaled to Simon. He reached into the briefcase again. It was like a magician's hat that only produced nightmares for the Gallagher family. He pulled out a thick black folder. It wasn't a legal document this time. It was a financial ledger. You owe $540,000 to the Venetti brothers in Chicago, I said. High-interest bridge loans. You put up your construction equipment as collateral, then you sold the equipment and pocketed the cash. That is called conversion, Buck. In their line of work, they call it stealing. Buck went pale. How do you know that? Because the Venetti brothers are businessmen, I said. They don't care about breaking legs, they care about getting paid. When I called them and offered to buy your debt for cash, they were very happy to sell. I took the folder from Simon and dropped it on the table right next to the ruined cake. I own your paper, Buck. Every dime. You don't owe the mob anymore. You owe me. Buck started to shake. But that means... It means I am calling the note due, I said. Right now. In full. $540,000. I don't have it, Buck screamed. You know I don't have it. That is why we needed the house. That is why we needed the $1 million. I know, I said coldly. And since you cannot pay cash, I am exercising my right to seize assets to satisfy the judgment. I turned to the security team. Liquidate them, I ordered. The room erupted into a different kind of chaos. It wasn't the chaos of violence, it was the chaos of a foreclosure sale happening in real time on human subjects. Miller stepped up to Buck. He didn't ask nicely. He grabbed Buck's left hand and ripped the gold Rolex from his wrist. Hey, Buck shouted. That is a Daytona. It is worth 30 grand, 25 on the used market, Miller said, tossing the watch into a canvas evidence bag, held by another guard. It is a start. Miller reached into Buck's pocket and pulled out the keys to the Mercedes parked outside. He tossed them to Ramirez. Get the car, Miller said. Park it behind the truck. It is ours now. No, Buck wailed, thrashing against the cuffs. Not the car, it is a lease, not anymore, I said. Then Miller did something that made the remaining guests gasp. He grabbed the lapels of Buck's velvet tuxedo jacket. Take it off, Miller barked. What? Buck stammered. The suit, I said. Custom Italian velvet. Probably cost you $3,000. That goes toward the principal. Take it off. Buck tried to pull away, but Miller was relentless. He unbuttoned the jacket and yanked it down over Buck's cuffed arms, trapping them behind his back. He pulled it free, leaving Buck in his sweat-stained dress shirt. The shoes too, I said. Miller kicked Buck's legs apart. He ripped the velvet loafers off Buck's feet. They stripped him. Right there in the foyer of the house he had tried to steal, they stripped him of every symbol of his fake wealth. The watch, the car keys, the jacket, the shoes. He was left standing in his socks, shivering and broken, a king without a kingdom. Then the team turned to Trish. She was huddled in the chair, trying to make herself small, trying to hide behind her own hands. But there was nowhere to hide. Mrs. Gallagher, Simon said, stepping in front of her. The earrings, the bracelet, and the rings. Please. Trish began to sob. These are mine. They are family heirlooms. They were bought with stolen money, I corrected, which makes them proceeds of crime. Hand them over. One of the female guards stepped forward. She wasn't rough, but she was efficient. She unclasped the diamond tennis bracelet. She pulled the sapphire rings from Trish's fingers. She took the diamond studs from her ears. Trish screamed as each piece was dropped into the bag. It was the sound of a woman losing her identity. She wasn't Trish Gallagher, the socialite, anymore. She was just a thief in a glittery dress. But there was one thing left. The only thing I really cared about. I walked over to her. She looked up at me, her makeup running, her eyes full of hate. I pointed to her neck. The necklace, I whispered. Trish clutched the double strand of pearls. No, she hissed. Not these. Brittany gave them to me. They were a gift. They were not hers to give, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had barely managed to contain all night. Those pearls belonged to Molly Cross, my wife, Brent's mother. She wore them on our wedding day. She wore them when she held Brent for the first time. I gave them to your daughter to welcome her into our family, to signify that she was one of us. I leaned down, my face inches from hers. And she gave them to you, I spat. Like a trinket, like a party favor. You are not worthy to have them around your neck. You are not worthy to touch them. Take them off. Trish shook her head, clutching the pearls tighter. No. I looked at the female guard. Take them, I ordered. The guard reached out. Trish tried to bite her. The guard didn't flinch. She grabbed Trish's hands and forced them away. She reached behind Trish's neck and unclasped the diamond latch. She pulled the necklace free. It slid from Trish's neck like water. The guard handed them to me. I held the pearls in my calloused hand. They were warm from her skin. I felt a wave of nausea that such a beautiful thing had been so close to such ugliness. I took a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped them down carefully, cleaning away the taint of the Gallaghers, before slipping them into my pocket next to my heart. You have nothing left, Buck, I said, turning back to him. I have your car, I have your jewelry, I have your clothes, and I still have your debt. You will be working for me for the rest of your life just to pay the interest. Buck was sobbing now, openly weeping like a child. He looked at the pile of his possessions in the evidence bag. He looked at his wife, stripped of her jewels. He looked at his daughter, cuffed and silent. We are ruined, he whispered. Yes, I said. You are. I looked at the guests who were still frozen in the corners of the room. "The show is over," I announced. "Go home. And if I were you, I would lose the Gallagher's number. They are going to be very busy for the next 10 to 15 years. I turned to Simon. "Get them out of my sight." Simon nodded to the team. They hauled the Gallaghers to their feet. Buck in his socks, Trish in her bare neck, Brittany in her delusion. They dragged them out the shattered front door into the snow, where the sheriff's deputies were waiting to trade our zip ties for state steel. I watched them go. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happiness. I felt the grim satisfaction of a job finished. I felt the weight of the sledgehammer after the wall finally comes down. I turned back to Brent. He was sitting in the wheelchair watching me. He looked at the pearls in my pocket. He looked at the empty doorway. I walked over to him. The house was quiet now. The music had stopped. The only sound was the wind blowing snow through the broken door. I put my hand on the back of his wheelchair. "Let's go home, son," I said. "Not this house. This place was poisoned." I pushed him toward the door, past the ruined feast, past the shattered glass, past the remnants of the life he thought he had. We rolled out into the cold, clean winter night. My old truck was waiting, its engine running warm and reliable. I lifted my son into the passenger seat. I put his broken leg up on the dashboard. I covered him with a blanket. I got in the driver's seat and put it in gear. We left the mansion behind, dark and empty. We drove toward the cabin, toward the wood stove and the silence of the pines. "Don't ever let anyone chain you up again, Brent," I said, staring at the road. He looked at me, his eyes shining in the dashboard lights. "Never again, Dad," he whispered. We drove on, leaving the wreckage in the rearview mirror. It was the best Christmas present I could have ever given him. Freedom. And the truth. The flashing lights of the sheriff's cruisers cut through the falling snow outside, painting the ruined living room in strokes of red and blue. It was a stark contrast to the warm golden glow of the chandelier that had illuminated their gluttony just an hour before. Big Jim Miller walked over to where Simon and his team were holding the prisoners. Jim and I had hunted deer together in the deep woods for 20 years. I knew him as a man of few words and absolute integrity. He looked at Buck's bloodied face, at Trish's bare neck, and finally at Brittany, who was huddled against the wall, shivering, not from cold, but from the total collapse of her reality. Jim nodded to Simon, formally accepting custody of the suspects. It was a handover from the justice of the wolf to the justice of the law. "You did good," Harlan, Jim said quietly, his hand resting on his holster. "We have the paramedics en route for Brent, but my deputies can take this trash out to the cars now. We will book them for kidnapping, aggravated assault, fraud, and about a dozen other felonies the DA is going to dream up once he sees that video." I looked at Buck. The fight had gone out of him. He was just a sagging old man in socks, realizing he would likely die in a cell. Trish was staring blankly at the wall in a catatonic state of shock. But Brittany was not done. She had one card left to play, or so she thought. As the deputy grabbed her arm to haul her up, she let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She twisted her body, fighting against the grip, not to run away, but to throw herself toward the wheelchair. She dropped to her knees. She crawled across the polished hardwood floor, her expensive stockings tearing on the debris from the shattered door. She ignored me completely. She looked only at Brent. "Baby, please," she sobbed, clutching the armrest of his wheelchair with her cuffed hands. "You have to stop this. Look at what they are doing to me. I am your wife. I love you. Everything I did for us. We were going to be rich, Brent. We were going to be free." She rested her forehead against his knee, right above the cast that covered his shattered bone. "Don't let them take me," she begged. "Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you forgive me. You always forgive me, Brent. Please." I watched my son. This was the moment I had feared. Brent had a heart too big for his own good. It was his greatest strength and his fatal flaw. He had forgiven her for overspending. He had forgiven her for isolating him from his friends. He had forgiven her for 1,000 small cuts over the years. I held my breath, my hand hovering near his shoulder, ready to intervene if he wavered. But the man sitting in that wheelchair was not the same man who had fallen in love with her 3 years ago. That man had died in the basement, chained to a pipe in the dark. Brent looked down at the top of her head. He looked at her hands clinging to him. Then he slowly shifted his gaze to his leg. He looked at the dirty plaster, at the bruising that disappeared under the cast. He remembered the pain. He remembered the sound of the golf club hitting his bone. He remembered her laughter as she walked back upstairs to drink wine while he screamed. Then he looked at me. He saw the old man in the flannel shirt who had torn the world apart to save him. Brent looked back at Brittany. His expression was not angry. It was something far worse. It was indifferent. "You were right, Brittany," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "You always told me I was weak. You told me I needed someone to look after me. You told me I needed protection." Brittany looked up, hope flaring in her tear-filled eyes. "Yes, baby. Yes. I was protecting you." Brent shook his head slowly. "I did need protection," he said. "I needed protection from you." The hope vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by a void of despair. She opened her mouth to scream again, but she had nothing left to say. The truth had silenced her. "Get her out of here," Brent whispered. The deputies stepped in. They hauled Brittany to her feet. She went limp, dragging her feet as they marched her out into the cold night. I watched them load her into the back of the cruiser. I watched them load Buck and Trish. I watched the doors slam shut, sealing their fate. The sirens wailed as they drove away, taking the toxicity that had poisoned our lives with them. The house was empty now, save for Simon and his team, who were efficiently packing up their gear. The silence that settled over the room was heavy but clean. I looked at Simon. "Thank you," I said. Simon nodded. "The invoice will be in your inbox, Mr. Cross. We will secure the property until you decide what to do with it." "Burn it," I said. "Or sell it. I don't care. Just make sure nothing of theirs is left when the sun comes up." I turned to the wheelchair. "Ready to go home, son?" Brent nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, Dad. Please." I didn't wait for the paramedics. I knew how to splint a leg, and I knew my son needed to be out of there more than he needed a hospital bed right this second. I wheeled him through the foyer, past the ruined dinner, past the memories of his torture. We went out into the night. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world covered in a blanket of pure white. The air was crisp and cold, biting at our lungs, cleansing the smell of stale perfume and fear from our noses. My old Ford F-150 was parked right where I left it, blocking the driveway like a sentinel. It was covered in snow, a humble beast compared to the luxury cars that had filled the lot hours ago. But it was paid for. It was honest. And it ran. I opened the passenger door. I lifted my son out of the chair. He was light, too light, but I held him close. I placed him gently on the seat, arranging his broken leg on the dashboard, padding it with my spare jacket. I buckled him in. I walked around to the driver's side and climbed in. The engine roared to life with a rumble I felt in my chest. I turned on the heater, blasting warm air into the cab. We drove down the winding driveway, passing the for sale sign the realtor had probably already prepared in her mind. I didn't look back. We drove for 40 minutes in silence. The city lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the dark, towering shapes of the pine trees. The road turned from pavement to gravel, then to dirt. We pulled up to the cabin. It was small, made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney that puffed gray smoke into the night sky. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows. I helped Brent inside. I settled him onto the big leather couch in front of the wood stove. I stoked the fire, adding a couple of logs until the flames were roaring, dancing behind the glass. The cabin smelled of cedar and wood smoke. It smelled like safety. I went to the small kitchen. I didn't have champagne. I didn't have lobster. I poured milk into a saucepan and heated it up. I stirred in cocoa powder and sugar. I walked back to the living room and handed Brent a steaming mug. "Here," I said, sitting in the rocking chair opposite him. "Drink this." Brent took the mug with both hands, letting the heat seep into his frozen fingers. He took a sip and closed his eyes. "It is good," he whispered. We sat there for a long time, just watching the fire. No music, no screaming, no lies. Just the crackle of the wood and the wind in the trees outside. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pearl necklace. I placed it on the coffee table between us. The diamonds sparkled in the firelight. "They are safe," I said. Brent looked at the pearls, then at me. "You saved my life, Dad," he said, his voice thick. "Not just my life. You saved my soul. I was going to give up. I was going to let them win." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I looked at my son, the architect, the dreamer, the man who had lost his way and found it again in the hardest way possible. "Listen to me, Brent," I said, my voice low and serious. "You have a good heart. That is a rare thing in this world. But a good heart without a spine is just a target." I pointed to the fire. "I let you go out into the world hoping you would find your own way. I wanted you to be independent. But I made a mistake. I didn't teach you how to spot the wolves. I thought if I hid my money, you would be safe from greed. But greed finds a way." Brent nodded, wiping a tear from his cheek. "I won't let it happen again," he said. "I know you won't," I said, "because now you know what they look like. You know they don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like a beautiful woman or a friendly in-law. Sometimes they smile while they are putting the chains on you." I stood up and walked over to him. I put a hand on his head just like I used to when he was a boy and had a nightmare. "You are going to heal," I said. "The leg will heal. The heart will heal. You are going to build new things, Brent. Better things. And you are going to do it as a free man." I looked him deep in the eyes. "But promise me one thing, son. Anything, Dad. Don't ever let anyone chain you up again," I said. "Not with metal. Not with guilt. Not with love that isn't real. If someone tries to take your freedom, you fight. You fight with everything you have. And if you can't fight, you call me." Brent nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "I promise, Dad. Never again." I smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "Good. Now drink your cocoa. It is getting cold." I sat back in my rocker and looked out the window at the snow. It was finally Christmas morning. We didn't have a tree. We didn't have presents. We didn't have a feast. But as I looked at my son safe and warm by the fire, I knew we had everything we needed. We had the truth. And we had each other. "Merry Christmas, son," I whispered to the quiet room. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Brent replied. And outside, the wind howled through the trees, singing a song of freedom for the two men who had survived the winter night. As I watched the snow settle on the pines, I realized that the greatest danger to a good heart isn't hatred. It is the tolerance of disrespect. My son thought he was keeping his family together by enduring their cruelty, but he was just feeding a beast that would never be full. We learned that night that you cannot buy love, and you certainly cannot negotiate with greed. True family is not defined by who sits at your table when the feast is served, but by who stands beside you when the walls come crashing down. Never set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they are the ones holding the matches. Stand tall, know your worth, and never apologize for protecting your own. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Let me know in the comments, would you have called the police immediately or would you have handled it exactly the way I did?